is what it is. But with that support that we have today, they would probably still be here. So
With the support that we have today,
the
meaning,
inclusion practices that you don't support.
so what I support is treating every student the way a child should be taught, should be treated. Just human dignity, human civility, kindness, respect. We don't need to, most kids want to fit in. And when we point out or highlight certain kids, many of those kids feel so awkward, and it makes the problem worse. Again, we treat everybody with kindness. We train the children to be respectful of all students and to treat them with basic human dignity and kindness. We don't have to agree on lifestyle choices to treat somebody as someone with divine worth.
I agree with that, but like how you were saying with the parents and the little pieces of paper,
Whether the student would feel safe.
yeah.
So,
But some parents are abusive. Some
right.
parents look at their children.
and that's true, and that's a good point, and I'm glad that you brought that up. This is why schools have school counselors. It's not to hide what's happening with the student and keep the parents in the dark. It's if the student feels unsafe, all the more reason to call the parent and bring them in and have a meeting between the school counselor, the student, and the parents, so that the counselors can help the parents figure out how to deal with this in a healthy way.
That's how you get the
And that one that respects the family's values.
That's how you get the children to come back with bruises and broken legs.
Well, I have a good friend that is a child psychologist that is dealing with these. His practice is exploding right now, not just with kids that have gender dysphoria or identify with LGBT, but also with kids that are having this idea forced on them that makes them have to go against their conscience when they believe that there's two genders, and now they're being told that there's a spectrum of genders, which goes against, so that's putting the child in a position of having to choose which of these authority figures in my life am I going to believe, right? It's like a toxic divorce, right, where each of the parents is using the child as a pawn, and the child has to figure out who do I listen to. That's an unfair position to put the child in. The family is the primary, and if the family is struggling, then there are resources to help that family learn better skills, so that and get families the help that they need if there is abuse in that situation.
Even if you don't agree with that, though. Like,
So we're all here, we want to hear our
We have just a few more minutes, and I have a lot more to cover.
A lot of us took a lot of time out of our schedules to listen to the presentation, and then we can
Thank
ask
you for
questions at
coming.
the end.
Okay. So, Castle. Let's see, where were we? What do we need to hit on? Okay. Part of the problem that we're facing right now is, again, Castle is a big part of it. Go on their website. You don't have to dig very deep. You have to get past the first page where they package it up nicely with all these nice sounding words, and then you can go to their website and search for keywords like equity, social justice, racial justice, gender, and you'll find everything you're looking for. You really don't have to be a wizard to figure out what's going on. Biden's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Executive Order was put out his first day of office, as well as his Racial Equity Executive Order that requires disaggregating data by race to show that there is systemic racism, right? So all of our schools, our data is being disaggregated by race, which is itself racist, because it implies that if you are not white, then you are inherently less capable or less intelligent, right? When they start to use that idea to show that certain kids are doing worse than others. children of color struggle more? Some do, and they can show that in the data, right? But that's not because they're less capable or less intelligent, and that's what they use the data to try and prove their point. It's because of all these other underlying issues with family, like democratic policies that incentivize single-parent homes, that incentivize it's part of the welfare system, right? All of these issues that make for a less stable home life. It's a family issue and a welfare issue more than it is a race issue. And when we say everything is to be blamed on race, then we're masking the real problem. And we'll never be able to fix what's at the heart of these disparities, right? And to be truthful, we will never solve the disparities completely, because that's if we're living by the American ideals of equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, all right? There's always going to be diverse outcomes as long as there is differences in personal initiative and responsibility, and that's what they're trying to erode away, that idea of personal responsibility and personal initiative, where we create opportunities, we remove the barriers to these opportunities, and we allow everybody the opportunity if they're willing to take hold of that and go for it. But our kids are being taught the soft bigotry of low expectations. In Murray School District, they just, for the second time, reduced the grading scale. So where 60% used to be a D, now it's 50%, or the first change was 50%, but now, like at the high school, a zoology teacher sent home the grading scale and it was 20% or lower is an F. So it's like impossible to fail. So it looks like they're still doing well, but the kids are progressively being dumbed down, and they know that there's, a lot of them don't have like due dates anymore. It's just like, well, turn it in whenever you get it done, right? So and that's the idea behind restorative justice practices, that we don't want to put extra burden or pressure on these kids, right? And cause more anxiety and depression or suicidal ideation. So we just make everything as easy as we can for them. This is part of the restorative justice practices is also, this is all critical race theory in practice. The restorative justice practices are the discipline practices, very lax discipline policies. Instead of zero tolerance, now it's no consequences, or very little consequences for bad behavior. A student gets in trouble with the teachers, goes to the principal's office and comes back with a sucker. Okay, this kind of thing. If you read the book called Why Meadow Died by Andy Bullock, this is a really important book. This book was written by a father whose daughter died in the Parkland, Florida school shooting in Broward County. And he says that it's his research. He dug into it. He did the investigative journalism because he could see how they were masking everything and making these excuses for why it happened and why the police didn't go in and why they just stood outside for an hour while they heard all the gunshots happening. It's because the police department had an agreement with the schools to not arrest anybody on campus, because the schools wanted to look good as far as their disciplinary policies, that they didn't have, to show that they didn't have discipline issues, right? And so there was money involved in that, and students could only be arrested off campus. So the bad kids, the troublemakers, knew that if they wanted to cause trouble, schools were the place to do it because they were untouchable, okay? And it just continued and continued until this poor student that had been crying out for help. The police had visited his house a dozen times and never arrested him when they should have. If they had arrested him even once, when he turned 18, he would not have been able to go and buy a gun. But because they refused to arrest him, he was able to go buy a gun on his 18th birthday and come back to the school that failed him and shoot it up. This is restorative justice practices. And when she talked about reforming the what did they call it? This is what critical race theory has to do with the judicial system, right? And in fact, here in Utah, they had a new rule for the judiciary that instead of certain consequences for certain breaking of certain laws, now they have to look at each offender's personal situation or race or background to decide what an appropriate consequence is. So you get this inequity in a system that was created to be just and fair based on whether you broke the law or not, right? There are certain consequences, and now the consequences vary depending on the individual, even for the same crime. If that makes sense. So again, a lot of this is driven by Biden's policies that are then the NEA and the UEA supports. During the summer, the NEA held an entire conference, I think it was like a month long, called A Season of Justice. And you can go on their website and look at Ibram Kendi come and speak, among others. The NEA is now sponsoring a reality show called The Activist. And last year's Utah Teacher of the Year is going to be starring on that at the expense of the NEA, or the UEA is sponsoring him. So this idea of activism in the classrooms and teachers being trained by the teachers' unions to be activists. And you can go to any of those sites and see, you don't have to take my word for it. The NEA president, Becky Pringle, said, I need every NEA member to take your rightful place as leaders, as proud professionals, courageous racial and social justice activists, and strong unionists. Together, our engagement and advocacy will transform our vision into reality. On their website, Racial and Social Justice, the NEA Ed Justice